Alrighty, good evening, everybody, and welcome to GameSense. My name is Francis O'Rourke, and we want to thank you for watching us. If you're watching us live, I want to first off apologize for being a little bit late. If you didn't know, Skype is both the best program for this job and also the worst program of all time, so my apologies for that technical difficulty. First off, I want to thank our sponsor, Symbotic. They've been a great help to us. They've helped us out the last 3 years to help us do all the awesome stuff that we do, so we couldn't do without them. Check them out at Symbotic.com. I'd like to introduce our hosts and our guests tonight. First off is Evan Morrison from Team 5803. We've got Matt Stark from Team 174, Adrian Emerson from Team 148, and our guest tonight is Sean Zammit. He's from Team 4613. Sean, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, so I've been doing FRC for 5 years now. When we started 4613, back when there were 14 teams or so in Australia. I've been the programmer, the driver for a few years, and I've messed about a bit in strategy.
Very cool. Well, thank you for coming on the show. And just so everybody knows, Sean is not sitting very, very still. We do have a picture in front of his camera, so don't expect him to move too much, hopefully, during the show. So after our main part of the show, we're going to have a 20 to 30-minute question and answer period with people from the Twitch chat. So if you've got a question for us, type it into the Twitch chat with !Q, followed by your question. And if we like it, well, what'll happen is when you do that, our Twitch chat bot will pick it up, store it, and if we like it, we'll answer it live on air in about an hour or so. Also, I'd like to say we don't take ourselves too seriously, and we hope that you don't either. Have fun, and if you don't like what we have to say, go out there and prove us wrong. All right, well, tonight we're going to talk again about Steamworks, but it looks like balls are back in town, at least in many different places. So let's go around the horn and ask everybody what their thoughts were from this past week. Let's start off with Sean. Sean, what are your thoughts about this past week?
So I think it's been interesting to see that a lot of the time shooting robots are able to outscore a rotor or a climb increasingly commonly. So with the 43 points or so they might get from a 40 kPa round, they can outscore a rotor, or if they're scoring more balls, they can overcome the 50 points of a climb, which is quite interesting to see in week 3. I probably would have expected that a little bit later as teams got to the 40, 50 kPa. And then also there's been 254 shooting 50 kPa in teleop alone, which beats a climb by itself.
Yes, exactly. All right, well, my thought is sort of kind of a correlate to what you're saying, but also almost the exact opposite. We've seen an actual like statistical explosion in the number of teams that have been able to do 4 rotors in either in a match. I believe if you look at TBA Insights, last week it was about 1% of all playoff matches. This week it's almost 4%, which is like objectively not a ton. It's like going from like 3 or like a handful to like 30, but from a number standpoint, that's a huge increase. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues going on for the rest of the season. Emerson, what did you see this week?
I thought it was just interesting how we're seeing this game evolve. I think both what you and Sean were talking about. I think it's still true that we're seeing kind of 2 different styles of gameplay, both with their own merits, depending on what your alliance looks like. And I think it's just been really interesting to watch. And I think that there's going to be even more, evolution of this game moving forward. I'm really excited to see it.
Cool. All right, Evan, what's your thoughts from this week?
Yeah, well, one thing that I've noticed going off of the 4-rotor discussion is that pretty much all of the 4-rotor matches, they're getting the gear for that last rotor in the last 30 seconds, which strategically makes sense, right? You kind of don't care if you give them a free climb and maybe even if you miss yours in playoffs because you're still come out 40 points ahead. But it's still a risky move, and I'm curious to see if teams get faster at that, or if new strategies to stop it starts coming out.
That's a real good point. I think we'll talk more about that later on in the show as well. Matt, what's your thoughts from this week?
Yeah, so something that's really cool about this game that I've seen is the evolution of strategy changes in the middle of matches. It's been cool to watch students and mentors and coaches figure out in the middle of a match, wait, we should change our gameplay and do this instead. And you can almost watch the robots do the strategy change as they're deciding what to do. So it's been neat to see that, where there might be one team that decides to do one thing, and then based on how things are going, they change it in the middle of a match, where in the past couple games, it's been the same strategy throughout the whole match. So it's been neat to see that change this year.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, especially considering this is in many respects a game about cycles. You think that doing the same thing over and over means you do it the whole match, but that's certainly not the case we've seen. All right, so for our first topic, let's talk about this past week, the week that was. So we saw a lot of teams from literally all corners of the globe doing some pretty crazy stuff, specifically in the department of scoring balls, but not just that. So, Sean, why don't you tell us a little bit about your team's run over the last, say, week or so? And before you start, actually, I kind of want to just preface it. So if you guys didn't check it out on social media or don't follow the Blue Alliance page like the rest of us do incessantly, 4613 has won 3 regionals this year. Not easy to do, especially in your first 3 events. But those 3 regionals were all within 10 days of each other, which I think is the fastest day per banner ratio of anybody I've ever heard of. Basically, you have to like win a regional right before a championship and win the championship to do anything better than that. Does that sound about right? Yeah. So, Sean, what were your experiences with this game, and how did you guys do what you did?
So, from the beginning of the season, we've approached the game with the intention of going to those 3 regionals in quite a quick succession. And that meant that our robot, we had to design it to be modular, easy to disassemble and reassemble when we would jump between events in a day or so. So then we just tried to be a reliable shooting bot with not so many overcomplicated parts, such that we were able to get to a competition with what looked like 2 suitcases of half a robot and put it together in an hour or so, such that we were ready to compete on the practice day.
That's pretty crazy, actually. Were you guys shooting?
That's honestly incredible.
Yeah. So is the reason you put them in a suitcase because you can't ship it that quickly between China and Australia?
Yeah, that was the idea. And then the other idea of having 3 of the regionals in quick succession was that we would be able to train up a bunch of drive teams. So we've actually had 3 different drive teams across the different events, which also, I guess, helps when we're not going to be exhausted from having just jumped back from China to Australia to drive again.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Is there? This is kind of a side topic. Is there a time change between Sydney and China?
It's 2 hours or so, so it's not. Oh, don't quote me on that. I'm probably wrong, but it's not too bad. It would just be the plane flight that I think would be the killer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, sort of to go on this, tell us a little bit more about how you guys approached shooting, especially early on in the season when shooting was almost non-existent, and how you sort of worked your way into becoming a more of a shooting machine, especially at your last event.
Right. So at the beginning of the build season, when we had a look at the game, we figured that any bot that could do a 40 kPa auto would be incredibly powerful until everyone either caught up with it or the championships happened and everything went crazy because it's championships. So we've got gear mechanisms that we've been experimenting with, such as at China, you would have seen us run more of a gear-oriented strategy sometimes with experimentations on autonomous to get that working and shooting. And we saw that we got a couple of matches where we managed to get the ranking point for pressure, and it really bumped us up on the rankings because at that time we were down a match or 2, and so it was essentially an extra win. And so since then, we've been moving a little bit away from the rushing gears to the airship and focusing on trying to get 40 kPa every single match, which is what we attempted to do at the South Pacific, which was our 3rd regional. So
So, and
I don't know what to add to
believe
that.
I believe you actually almost did it, right? I think you missed it in like one match, maybe.
We missed it in just one of the qualifications.
Okay, so
Which is,
not quite perfect, but almost there. We'll give it to you. We'll give it to you.
we're very happy with it.
Yes, certainly. All right, so you guys obviously have been going crazy with all this ball stuff, but you kind of also mentioned the power of the ranking points. Let's why don't we show a video of 4613 so we can sort of see what their robot looks like, and sort of how they do all their stuff. I guess why don't we talk a little bit about the auto shooting? We see that a lot this year or this week in a lot of different events. What do we think the power of the shooting in auto means, and is it like that? Is it like as important as it seems to be?
I mean, from what I've observed, absolutely. Not just in in the Australian regionals that 4613 was competing at, but pretty much everywhere. You're looking at any robot that can get significant amount of points in auto from the fuel, even if they're not getting anywhere close to 40 kPa during the match or hitting the 20 kPa mark or above in auto. Just the ability to get those extra points in auto and move into the rest of the match with what's essentially a tiebreaker and a winner. I know for us, for Apex, we competed this past weekend, and we started to add in shooter functionality, and specifically, we basically only shot in auto, right? We'd set up with our 10 balls, we'd shoot in auto, and then go on with the rest of the match. But we were scoring, 4 to 6 of our fuel in auto every match, and that's enough that we knew that if we had a lead with rotors, we were going to win, assuming that everybody climbed, right? And when you start to get into playoffs, that's an absolutely massive advantage to know that, okay, your partner got the gear on in auto, you got the fuel in auto, you have the lead, you just have to match what they do and you win, period. So it's, and then you start getting into the higher KPA stuff, and you can start to pull off some really crazy stuff that we'll talk about later with 254 and 118 and the likes.
Yeah, I was at Finger Lakes Regional this past week, and I would agree with Evan that the fuel shots in auto were not only to break tiebreakers, which is a big deal in itself, but also for things like penalties. You can't count on another alliance partner not to get a penalty. So if you're able to score enough to get enough points where it still offsets something like that happening, that seemed to be a big deal too, where trying to get that score instead of a penalty or maybe a missed climb if you could get that high, and those sorts of things to try and counteract if something else went wrong in the plan.
Yeah. And sort of going off of what Sean was talking about earlier, another robot we saw this week that did absolutely crazy stuff was 1690. They're from Israel. They played it was actually probably about a week ago today that they played. And if you guys haven't checked them out too. I think we'll put a video up as well. They basically did the same kind of strategy that the Redbacks did. They basically went into all their qualification matches and said, we're going to score 40 kPa as often as possible. Now, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong. Did you guys actually win most of the matches that you scored 40 kPa in?
We actually did. I suspect that was because most of the time we were down by just one rotor, so 40 kPa would match it, and then we'd have 1 or 2 balls on top of that.
Okay, cool. So these guys, however, 1690, they basically went about the strategy not caring if they won or lost. And in fact, I think their record at the end of the day was something like 6-4 or something like that. Maybe
they were 6-4.
Yeah, 6-4. Number 1 seed against a team that had 9 wins, because they got the KPA every match, which if you think about like math, obviously it makes total sense. But it's kind of a I'll say it's a ballsy strategy, right? To go that route, you got to know your robot's going to do what it's going to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and effectively to go off that math point, effectively, if you go 50-50 on wins and losses, right? It's the same mathematically number of ranking points. If you're getting your KPA bonus every match, the loss gives you 1 ranking point, the win gives you 3 ranking points. So for every pair of matches you get 4 ranking points, which is identical to if you're winning every match, right, and you go undefeated, but you don't get any extra bonuses. So it's really a powerful strategy, and that's also why you see so many of the top teams have this dedication to fuel, not just in qualifications, but just from an overall robot standpoint, is the understanding that you can get to a point where it's almost like 2012 in a lot of ways with the co-op bridge, right, where you can get to a point where you almost don't care if you're winning your matches or not, because it's so much more difficult for other teams at this stage in the game to guarantee that KPA bonus than it is for you. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens as we move later into the season, and especially at some of these more power events like district championships or Las Vegas, where you've got multiple teams who are running the strategy and how that ends up playing out.
Yeah, definitely true. And I think we're going to have to poke Emerson's brain about this later on, because she's going to what may be one of the most powerful events of the year in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks soon too. So actually, Sean, while you're here, were there a lot of other robots that shot at the regionals you were attending? Because it looked, from the videos I saw, it looks like you were certainly the best shooter at your events, but it looked like you may have been one of the few.
Yeah, so we were actually lucky most of the time to be in a field of gear-focused robots. There were a couple of matches where the gear robots would get to 4 rotors as well. But shooting-wise, we were kind of in a nice position there because we didn't have a major competitor in that aspect of the game.
Yeah. So basically all the balls in the field were yours to claim. So I guess the other thing is some of the shooters we've seen this week are pretty incredible, actually. Like, I think now might be a good time to bring up 118 because we saw their robot. Emerson, you saw the robot in person, right? A couple weeks ago, or I forget if you competed with them or not.
No, we actually didn't. The first time we're gonna see them is in Vegas. Speaking of,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's better than last season when we didn't see them at all. Yeah, man, 118, they looked incredible this weekend. I think everybody in the first community kind of knew that they were going to come out like ready to really rock the field after Hub City. But man, their shooter looked absolutely incredible. Didn't matter if it was auto or teleop, and they every match they came out and they were scoring, well above the 40 KPA. And I mean, it was just really incredible to watch. I couldn't believe it. They just looked really great.
Yeah. What especially shocked me is that they continued shooting well above the 40 KPA mark.
Yeah.
We'll see teams like 1690, like we were saying earlier, they'll get to 40 and they'll stop. Mm-hmm. But 118, I think I saw some matches where they go up to 85 KPA.
Yeah.
Approximately a boatload of balls.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what their highest match was.
I think it was like 91.
It was like 90 something.
Right? Yeah.
And you're talking, I mean, at that point, you've outshot a climb and an extra rotor, right? Mm-hmm. By yourself. That's insane.
Yes.
Right. But it's also a really good way to guarantee you win a match.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Sean, when you guys were doing this, from the matches I saw, it saw like most of the time you were pushing to get to the 40 by the end of the match. Were you guys consistently getting above 40, and did you keep shooting even after you got 40, or did you at some point decide to swap over to gears, which your robot's actually still really good at by itself?
Yeah, so we found that after we got 41, essentially, going for more balls was not quite worth it. So we would normally try to get a gear or two after that, and then just guarantee that we got that climb every time.
So I got to ask you, why do you think you went for that direction when 118 went the direction of putting boatloads of balls in?
So I think it was important for us to try to get to the 3 rotors, and most of the time that was highly benefited by us chucking even just 1 or 2 gears on.
Okay.
Whereas the amount of ball differential we could have got in that time is less than the 40 points that will be given by a rotor.
All right, that makes sense.
Some of it also depends on just, there's some break points for shooters, right? If you can't get 40 kPa in the course of one match, then it's not worth going for 40 kPa almost, right? Outside of auto, it's almost not worth shooting. Sure, you can, right? And more points is more points. But there's a break point at where you can solo 40 kPa, and then for 118, right? Some of it's also probably just trying to push the limits of what they can do and figure that out. But if you can reasonably score 80 to 90 kPa in a match, right, now it starts to make sense to actually try and continue shooting because, if your partners get the other rotor, great. But, I don't think 118's gears are good enough yet for them to do the 40 kPa and get 3 rotors by themselves. So just keep shooting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What? Go ahead, Emerson.
Oh, I was going to say, I've been saying all week, if you're not going against another shooter, 1 kPa and 39 kPa are exactly the same almost.
Right.
And so, and then in the elims, I think there's some different breakpoints for kPa, because of the bonus, and because of, or depending on what alliance you're going against, I think that those breakpoints become different. But I just think it's really interesting, I think the choices that some of the shooters are making of when to stop and when to keep going, or just go all out all match and not worry about anything else.
Yeah. So now we've talked a lot about how shooting can win you matches. Let's talk maybe a little bit really quick about how shooting can't win you matches. And unfortunately, this is kind of what happened in 1986 this year at or this past weekend at their event. For those of you who don't know, 1986, we're going to put up a video of them right now because their shooter is crisp. It's not as fast as 15, but look at it in the low left corner. It's basically like just a constant flow of balls. They put 20 in a row without missing. It's absolutely incredible. In this match, they're going to score a ton of points, but they didn't. They actually got knocked out in the semifinals by an alliance that could do 4 rotors. So I guess the question here is this kind of what Emerson was saying, where at some point you have a break point and they just missed it basically?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. You got to play the strategy, right? And if you have 3 offensive robots that are primarily doing gear cycles, you have to try with one shooting robot to counteract all those points. So can you keep up with that time frame? It was proven there anyway that wasn't able to be done, and it's a tough call by an alliance trying to figure out how the point value to counteract what they're going to do. And being able to switch strategies in the middle of a match, seeing what's happening too, makes it even tougher.
Yeah.
And watching those semifinals, I think part of it was just that, it comes down to a game of seconds, really. And there were a couple of times where I felt the defense that Titanium's alliance was playing wasn't effective enough. And had it been a little bit more effective, I mean, I mentioned this in my thoughts initially, but they're really close to not getting that last rotor, right? And if they don't get that last rotor, they don't win the match. Or if they get the last rotor but they don't climb, I think in one of them, and Titanium had. I believe their pilots put on the third rotor gears, but didn't spin them quite enough times to get the points. Right, that's how close they were to beating a 4-rotor alliance. Is one missed climb from their opponents and actually spinning that third rotor enough. So, they got beat by it. I don't think it was necessarily a bad strategy. I think that it was just a little bit of poor execution. And maybe just not expecting that their opponents could really pull it off 2 matches in a row, as well.
Yeah, that's true. There's been so few of these that it's rare to happen simultaneously, or excuse me, not simultaneously, consecutively. That other word.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go on to probably the last video we probably want to look at today, which is quite possibly the match of the week for sure. It's got to be finals match number 2 at San Francisco. And this is 254, 971, and 4990?
4990 Griffins. Yeah.
There we go. All right. And they go up against the number 2 alliance, 604, 2035, and 3256. 2v1, and they win with shooting.
And it's worth noting, this is 2v1 without their number one overall selection, fuel scoring extraordinaire 971, right? So 971 had to sit out the match because they had a drivetrain problem that they discovered while they were pushing the robot into position in autonomous. So a lot of people were asking, well, why didn't they just call a timeout or whatever? You know, it wasn't that it was a particularly difficult problem to fix, but they actually discovered it too late to legally call a timeout or a backup robot. Not that I think they would have called a backup. But you're basically looking at 254 and a third partner playing defense, winning a finals match at a regional, which is, for one, absolutely insane. And two, I think really demonstrates the level of strategic understanding that the 254 has about this game and what they can and can't get away with, and what their best chance at winning this match is.
Yeah, Sean, I want to kind of get your take on this because you've been to a lot of events, probably more events than any of us here have actually. But what's your take on this match? Like, do you is this a strategy you would have the wherewithal to pull off, or do you think this is something that is like uniquely a desperation move?
Well, I did a little bit of a double take when I looked at the field at the end, and I realized that 971 wasn't on it, actually, when I watched it for the first time. So, in a similar way to... Because what we did in the finals was we were shooting 40 kPa, getting the 20-point bonus, and getting 60 points that would beat a climb. And it looked almost like 254 were doing a similar thing, and that 20-point bonus of getting the 40 kPa seems to have carried them through. They would have lost by 1 point otherwise, I think. So, yeah, they can get a whole lot of balls up. So they're able to do something like that. I think they got over 100 just in teleop to enable that to be possible. And, yeah, I guess they just played good defense to stop the fourth rotor going up.
Yeah, actually, I kind of want to touch on this because actually, Adrian, you and I had differing opinions in Slack when we were talking about this when it first happened. What do you think this is as much a win for the Red Alliance as it is for a not win, we'll say, for the Blue Alliance? A choke?
Yeah. Oh, man. Watching that match was hard for me. I mean, props to 254. They really played that match brilliantly. But, man, the Blue Alliance, I felt, really had, obviously they had the upper hand robot-wise. And, yeah, I don't really know what happened there. It seemed like they just kind of fell apart a little bit. I don't know. I have to admit, I'm not behind the glass, and so I don't like to. I like to judge. It's really hard. It's a job I definitely don't want. But yeah, I think they may have just not realized exactly what they needed to do to pull out a win there. And they were really close, obviously. They still had a chance to win right at the end. But yeah, I don't know what happened there, but yeah, I think they just missed it a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, Blue Alliance was a missed climb away from taking it to the third match. And not even a, didn't catch the rope, freaked out missed climb, right? Mm-hmm. Warrior boards were up, and they were touching the pad, and they slipped. And so you're talking about essentially a robot failure missed climb that happens at the most inopportune time possible. And, I haven't looked back to see if that alliance was able to get 4 rotors any other time during playoffs. You'd think they were still under some defense. 4990 was actually playing some pretty good choke point defense in there. So it's entirely possible that they were playing for the 4 rotor strategy there and just couldn't pull it off through the defense that was being played. As we've mentioned before, it really comes down to a game of seconds there. And especially if you've got the climb advantage over them and that gives you the win, there's something to be said for why push for this crazy 4 rotor, with 30 seconds left in the match, just get everybody back and get them climbed and we win the match. That's the safe call to make. It's the conservative call to make, which when you're down a match but you're up a robot really seems like the best call to make from an in-match standpoint. And just to have a robot failure and not be able to get that climb there it's heartbreaking. But
Yeah.
we don't know what their strategy was going into the match. They also had very little time to actually try and re-strategize, right?
Absolutely.
Because literally it was 971's not actually setting up their robot on the other side of the field, right? So it's not like you've got a timeout to say, okay, well, what are we going to do now that they're not out there?
It seemed to me, and I could be wrong, but it seemed to me watching that in the finals, they that alliance specifically tried to play a little bit more defensively than they had in the quarters and the semis, and I think that hurt their overall point potential as an alliance. I think that if they come out in the finals and played it more like they had played in the quarters and semis, I think that they would have stacked up a little bit better against that 254 971 team. But like I said, I don't know. I have no idea what they were thinking. That's just what it looked like to me watching the matches.
And looking, I haven't watched all the matches, but looking back at the scores on Blue Alliance, that alliance got all 4 rotors engaged once previously, right? And so, and I haven't watched that match. They're clearly capable of doing it, but having the guts to try and pull that strategy off,
when you're especially
when you're up a robot as opposed to just trying to play some defense, that's a really tough call.
Yeah,
I would agree. I fell for him too. Watching that match, it seemed like they had a strategy in their mind of what they were going for 4 rotors and climbs, and then they just stayed with it, and it was a great idea. I mean, obviously they were like 2 or 3 inches from actually pulling it off. The conservative thing would have been to say, okay, let's what Evan was saying, let's make sure, let's hold back and just make sure everybody's ready to climb with 40 seconds left to go, 35, just have everybody sit there and wait for the ropes to drop. For so far in competition, that seems to be the more conservative avenue that seems to work most of the time, is just wait for the climbs. There's very few robots right now that then that last 30 seconds can go all the way across field, bring a gear over, deliver it, and climb. It's just that time frame is tough.
So that's actually an interesting point that when I was talking earlier about like the evolution of this game, I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm excited to see is how the hang evolves as the season goes on, because you're totally right. Right now, at 30 seconds for the most part, everybody is right there at their airship, ready to climb. And I'm interested to see how teams start using that 30 seconds to basically win matches.
Right.
And I think that there's a lot of tricks that we're going to see, and a lot of cool moves or missed opportunities that start to happen in that last 30 seconds. The more competitive this game gets.
Yeah,
I mean, we've seen a little bit of it with fuel shooting early on. Killer Bees made a habit of shooting in the last 30 seconds before going to climb. So did 987 High Rollers. But I think there's very few teams that have the confidence in their climb and their shooting to the point where they're doing that. And then when you start to bring 4 rotors into the strategy, it really gets interesting.
Yeah, the one advantage right now that you can clearly see is that if you can do it where you go across field, come back, deliver gear, or shoot fuel and climb, is that there's basically no one to stop you. Everybody's trying for the climb at the 30 seconds. So there's if you can get around the opponent's airship without touching anybody, you're good. So I'm in agreement with Emerson. It'll be interesting to see because there are some fast climbers out there. So it's a matter of how far do you want to push it? Do you want to try and climb with 5 to go? Do you want to try with 8 to go? Those sorts of things. But it's going to be interesting to see it evolve.
Speaking of fast climbs, so we played this past weekend at Mount Vernon. Apex did, and we number 1 seed. We picked the Cyborg Ferrets 3238, who had by far the fastest climber at the event, and a ground gear, and that's all they did. They did gears and they climbed, but they played the strategy to perfection in the finals, where we played a 3 rotors and defense strategy, and they would go and hold whatever the closest opponent robot was And you can watch this. The match videos aren't up yet, unfortunately, but once they do go up, you can watch this. They basically just played a game of chicken center field with CPR 3663 and said, we can climb faster than you can. So we're going to be on your side of the field and you're stuck on our side of the field. And, and they'd go and they'd wait there, and they waited until I think about 10 seconds left of the match. And then they went and climbed. Right. And that was too late for CPR to get back and grab a hold of the rope and get up. And it was just, for one, really gutsy to pull that off. Right. But they also knew that if it didn't work and neither of them got the climb, we had the win. So they essentially they know they can take it down to the point where they're going to be barely able to get the climb. And so for sure, the other robot's not going to get the climb. And so it's either a wash and we win or it's a blowout. And right. it was just so cool to see.
Not to draw too many, but kind of similar to the 2007 World Champions strategy, basically, like keep it at a draw and make the other people execute in the area that they can't do it well.
Yep.
So Sean, kind of, I want to hear from you. I know it's hard because we can't see your face, but so when you guys were doing your strategy throughout the last 3 events, how did you pick the time to climb? Did you guys ever have a position where you thought you could push it and maybe like not climb at 30, or was your goal to put yourself so far ahead that the climb was the last sort of the icing on the cake that would guarantee you the W?
A lot of the time we would look at the score and we'd go, we're safe to climb at about 30 seconds. I know that on our last qualification match of the first day of South Pacific, we actually hadn't hit the 40 kPa yet, and we left it to about 10 seconds to climb. But at the stage the regionals are at, the climbs are still, or were still, absolutely essential to get. So we were trying to keep it safe and get up the rope with 20 seconds to go if we could. Okay,
cool. I actually forget, is your climber like super fast, or is your climber more average?
It's probably 6-7 seconds, I'd say.
Okay. That's pretty good. Cool. All right, so guys, that was a great discussion about this last week and all the cool robots we saw. This may be one of the sort of biggest weeks for big scores and big blowouts we've seen in a while. Hopefully next week lives up to it. Not quite sure it's going to work. Not sure it's going to happen unless you're watching the Waterloo District. I don't know it's the same venue and number of teams as the regional, but whatever. So we're going to move on to our next topic for the evening, which is basically talking about how do you get that 40 kPa? What is the actual strategy that you need to follow in order to get there? And so I'm going to start off with this kind of. So obviously we've talked about how important autonomous is, and this may come as a surprise to our longtime GameSense listeners, but autonomous is important this year, which seems to be every year for some reason. But if you can't put at least 10 balls in that high goal, if you're that KPA shooter and you're looking for the 40 kP, if you can't put at least 10, probably 20 in there, you're probably just going to have to call off shooting altogether, like Emerson was saying, because not being able to get 40 balls into the boiler and counted by the serializer before the auto ends puts you so far behind that I don't even think that. I think that you'd be hard pressed to find any robots except maybe the tip top robots like 254 and 1986 that can score that many that quickly.
Yeah, there's a handful of teams out there that can probably do it, but most robots, from what I've seen in general, if you're hitting about 16 to 20 in auto, then your shooter is almost guaranteed to be good enough, assuming that you can line it up, is almost guaranteed to be good enough to also get the remainder and teleop if that's what you focus on. So I've been kind of looking at that as the metric, is that any team that's been able to reliably hit between 16 and 20 kPa in auto is likely capable of getting all 40 throughout the match if they're dedicated to it.
Yeah, one thing has been proven from the Finger Lakes Regional. There were teams that were scoring a gear on the peg and then shooting their 10 balls. So it's definitely possible in that first small amount of time to be able to do both things. And there were also teams that then were going over to the hopper and doing that as well. So it's definitely possible to get all of the one gear and the 10 balls off and score them all if you're accurate enough.
Yeah, that's for sure. I actually kind of want to ask Sean and have him talk about this too, because for all of our robots here, all of our team's robots, none of us have run shooting cycles yet. Only Sean's robot has. So we know that we've talked about before, we talked about now, autonomous is important, but getting the rest of those balls, how exactly do you guys go about the field picking them up? Because you definitely prefer the hopper and having the balls roll into your robot than picking them up off the floor. So what's your general strategy for picking up the balls and doing the cycles you need to score the 40 kPa?
Yeah, so we generally found that as soon as the match would begin, we'd rush down the other side of the field to get the balls from the hopper closest to our opposition. Oh. And that was the hardest to line up, and we'd get those balls. And by the time we got back and did a shooting cycle, a lot of the times our opposition might have gone and emptied all the other hoppers. But because the balls were all closer to our boiler, we had enough time to pick them all up, get them into the shooter, shoot them all up. But yeah, we found that in auto, we were probably wanting at least 15, preferably 20, if we wanted to comfortably go for that, which in our first couple of regionals, we weren't really getting. And then as we've gone to a couple of regionals and our autonomous has become more reliable, it's allowed us to more consistently get those enough balls in auto to get the 40 kPa in qualifications. The other thing we found, though, when we were hitting the hoppers at each of the events was that the hoppers seemed to vary from event to event, in that it might have been the angle, it's also the distance from the ground. And so when we were in the Shenzhen regional, getting balls from the hopper would contact the top of our robot and get stuck. So we'd lose the bottom layer of the hopper. Whereas at Australia, I think it may have been, I don't know how much higher, but a tiny bit higher, 2 inches maybe. And it would just roll nicely into our robot, and we'd have another 20 balls that we could shoot up in autonomous, which was important for getting that 40 kPa.
Huh, I'd heard some talk about how hoppers vary in size. I know that basically the only thing that keeps them in position is that they're Velcro to the floor. But do you really think there was 4 centimeters of distance between the hoppers in China and the hoppers at your regional in Australia?
We are pretty confident of it. Having examined all the videos going, we need to get this autonomous working, we're losing the bottom layer of the hopper. Yeah, that's the conclusion we came to.
Wow. It's also worth noting that that there have been reports that the gear slots event to event have varied as much as an inch to an inch and a half in either direction. So I guess it's not particularly surprising to me that the hoppers would also be subject to that same kind of variation. It is a large amount. It's obviously both of those are going to affect teams significantly. But knowing that one is an issue, I think makes me more willing to believe that the other is also an issue of that magnitude.
I can say that at the competition I was at, that the hoppers were different between them. We noticed that there's a piece of angle iron that's supporting the polycarb that the hoppers sit on. And if it's installed diagonally in one direction, it makes the polycarb lean one way. And then if it's installed in the other direction, it leans the opposite way. And according to the field drawings, it's supposed to be one of those two directions. So just from that angle of support changes where they're coming out just from that.
Huh. Interesting. Well, I got to tell my team about that. We're going to start shooting there. And so, Yes, excellent. I've got all the tips and tricks ready. Let's talk a little bit more about, as I think Sean, you talked about this a little bit, is the importance of a ground pickup, right? So it looks like all of the top shooters have ground pickups that are off the charts. And I'll pull out somebody who didn't play this week but played 2 weeks ago, is 1114. And they don't have a ground pickup. They only pick up balls from the hoppers or from the loading station. But they won their event, and they did really well. They have a very accurate shooter. How important is a floor loader? And is it like on the scale of like you have to, and the only reason it works is because they're 1114, or you think there are ways to get away without it?
Well, 2481 Roboteers, I believe, don't have a ground pickup either. And they were #1 seed and won their event and were part of that 506 unpenalized high score match. Personally, I think it basically all comes down to how accurate is your auto, right? If your auto is accurate enough that you can get within, 10 or so fuel of the 40 kPa, you're going to be okay. And if you're not, then you're going to be in a world of hurt. Because I think realistically, if you have a hopper auto, you can probably get to one more hopper before your opponents get to all of them. And then of course you have the loading stations, etc. But if you need to get balls from more than one hopper, and you don't have in order to finish your 40 kPa, and you don't have a ground pickup, it's going to be a really tough time, at least until your opponents start scoring a lot of fuel that you can recycle back to the field.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo what Evan said, but it totally depends on what you're going for in a match. If you're a 254, or if you're a 118, and then the strategy that they both used this weekend, you need a ground pickup for. I mean, 254 never even caught from a hopper. They would hit the hopper and pick it up off the ground, which for them, man, their ball intake is killer. So, but I think, we saw with the Simbots and a few other teams, if your strategy is to get 40 and stop, I think that there's you have a lot of opportunities as long as you can shoot relatively accurately. I think there's a lot of opportunities to get 40 kPa, and you don't necessarily need one. So we'll see as the game goes on and as we get closer to World Championship how that changes. But right now I think I don't think you need one, for getting the 40 kPa. I think you can do it without it, but it just depends on your team and what else you want to do the rest of the match.
Right.
Hey, Sean, just a question for you. Would you say that your robot is better getting them from the hopper or from the ground?
Assuming we can get the lineup on the hopper, it's getting from the hopper is pretty quick, but once the hoppers are all dumped, there's also enough balls that are on the ground that it doesn't really make a difference.
Okay. I ask because something that scouts are starting to look at is, does a robot prefer a hopper or prefer the ground, and then depending on that, what is their alliance going to do about it? So one thing that the strategy that I've seen in videos and in person is that if it's known that the team struggles more with ground pickup, they'll make sure to dump all the hoppers out to make it take more time. And and something like 1114, who obviously is preferring the hoppers, same deal there. But if you're fine with the powerhouse teams that can pick it up off the ground just fine, like Sean was saying, his team can do that too, then they have to come up with something else to try and slow them down.
Yeah, and go ahead, Evan.
Oh, so in this video, this is final one from San Francisco. So this is with both 254 and 971 on the field. And what you'll see is immediately after auto, 971 is going to go and just trigger both of the hoppers on their side. And they're not even going to wait around for the balls to come out, right? The second one, I think they'll get them directly into the robot. But essentially, they're just creating a giant pool line of balls that both they and 254 then pick up on their way across the field. 971 will gather the extras on the way back, and now you've got two robots completely fully loaded, ready to shoot, and they just unload on the goal. And so this is certainly an example of two teams who would actually prefer to have the fuel on the ground, almost, because it takes them less time to get more fuel if they go trigger all the hoppers on the side and then just clean it up with the intakes.
And actually, go ahead, Evan.
Oh, no. That's good.
Okay, so what I was going to say is I think that this is also the first alliance we've seen where we've had two robots that are really, really good at shooting. This is like the first elimination alliance I've seen with that. And it seems like basically their plan is to get the minimum number of gears to stay competitive and just absolutely hammer the goal with balls. And obviously they pick a defensive robot to do that. But most events aren't going to have this kind of a layout, right? Unless you're Las Vegas or Waterloo with two of the three highly notable teams there, or what have you. How do you build an alliance around somebody that shoots well? Or if you shoot well, how do you build your alliance to maximize your chances? Are we looking for shutdown defense like 11-14 was doing, or are we looking for just a passable set of gears like we saw 118 in their alliance do?
I really think it depends on your opposition here, right? The entire Red Alliance is essentially betting on the fact that their one defense robot is going to be able to stop Blue from getting 4 rotors, right? As soon as 4 rotors is a legitimate threat that your opponent has to respect, this strategy goes out the window, right? They still only won the match by 24 points, even though they scored 69 fuel because they only got 2 rotors in the process. Now, right, that 69 fuel is enough to make up for that rotor and then some. But if your opponents have the threat of the 4 rotors, right, there's no way that you can't respect that and just afford to have 2 robots shooting the whole time. So then I think it reverts back to maybe a more normal either 3 and D or a modified 3 rotors and 1 shooter running 40 kPa or something of that ilk. But I don't think we will ever get to a point in the season where 2 shooters are good enough to outscore a 4 rotor bonus in playoffs. It's just not possible. I don't think the boiler can count fast enough.
I think you're probably right about that. But do you think I'm actually this makes me really hyped because I can't wait to see what it looks like when 3 robots start shooting. I have no idea what it's going to look like. I mean, I assume it's actually probably going to look less cool because there's probably going to be a lot fewer balls on the field. But I don't know. I'm hyped to see what at least maybe it's just because I'm a kid on the inside. I just like seeing the balls go up in the air and come back down. So I don't know. We'll see about that. But.
I mean, one last thing that'll be interesting when you start seeing more of these sort of high-powered dual or triple shooter alliances is when you start to overwhelm the goal with fuel. You're going to start to get this sort of almost infinite cycle, right? Where your opponents are forced to dump the fuel back on the ground in their own gear loading station, which they may or may not want, right? Probably don't. Or let it go to the overflow, which then you can dump directly back into one of your robots sitting there. So I don't think we've quite reached that criticality point yet. Certainly in those final matches, Blue Alliance was definitely forced to dump fuel onto the floor. But it'll be really interesting to see what happens then because you start accelerating the fuel if you have a really heavily fuel-focused alliance.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see in future competitions, maybe district champs, where you have fuel robots going against each other. Because until we see that, the gears just seem to be taking over too much that it's hard to counteract. But as soon as you see one really good shooter against another, or even a couple against one, then you'll start to see fuel being hoarded and all that kind of stuff because that's what their primary function is. So that'll be really interesting to see when that occurs later on. I don't know if you'll ever see like 3 robots trying it at one time and those sorts of things. But
I really think week 6 between Vegas and district championships that are running that weekend is when we're going to see a large enough concentration of good, high level fuel shooting robots that's a realistic possibility. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Vegas. It's a few weeks away, but it should be a lot of fun. Adrian, I assume you guys looking forward to Vegas too?
Yeah, we're looking forward to Vegas. We have one regional between now and then, so we're kind of focusing on that first. But yeah, we're absolutely looking forward to Vegas. Hopefully we have a working robot by then. I think that's the ultimate goal. It'll be way more fun that way.
Yeah, and so this actually brings a good way to sort of transition to our next topic, the check-in checkup here. So for those of you who don't know, this past build season we had 6 teams open up their build process and what they do during the season to us and show the world here on the RoboSports Network. And so during the rest of the season, we're going to tap in and see what they're up to. So Emerson, why don't you, real quick, I know that this may be the last show you're on because you're going to a couple of regionals back to back. Do you want to just give us a really quick blow-by-blow of what you guys did at your last event and how you're getting ready for the future events you're doing?
Sure. As I mentioned last week at Dallas, because of the gameplay that was happening there, we decided to take off our shooter. And we are in the process of making some different upgrades to the robot and some different modifications. We'll see which ones we decide will make it onto the robot in its final config, and we'll also see within our 30 pounds what exactly we can do at Lone Star and what exactly we can do at Vegas. So we'll see. Obviously, we're trying to work on our shooting and definitely 40 kPa auto, and from there we'll see what I guess how far we get in those goals. So.
All right, cool. Well, that's good to hear. So let's go real quick and talk about the other teams in check-in this week. So last week, 3 of our teams competed. Team 319, they were at the North Shore District event. They made it to the quarterfinals. Good luck on them. Right now, they're sitting at the bubble for the district championship. It's looking like they're on the good side of the bubble, but we're pulling for them to make their way into the district championship in Durham, New Hampshire in a couple of weeks. Also competing this past week was 3847 Spectrum. They were at their own home gym where the Lone Star Central Regional was held, and they were finalists once again. So that's 3 silver medals for them this year. I did that last year. It's still pretty cool. Trust me. Even I'll take any number of silver medals, even if there's no gold to go with it. That's okay. But they'll be playing another event in a couple of weeks too. And last but not least, 5803. That's Evan and also our director Stephanie's team. They won the Mount Vernon district, the second district win of the season. They were also the number 1 seed and also won the Industrial Design Award. So what did you guys change from your last event to this one?
We sped up our climber. We took off some what I would call clever engineering and went to some more basic and just robust engineering by using 2 motors to do different things instead of 1 motor to do 2 different things. And really we just spent some time on shooting. It was pretty cool. Mount Vernon was only a 28 team event, so it was a really small event, which was really nice for a lot of reasons, but mainly because our field reset crew was absolutely fantastic. We ran 100% on time on day 1, which is unheard of this year. But it also meant that we got 2.5 hours after our last match on Saturday on the practice field to just tune the shooter, and so we were shooting much better on Sunday. Into playoffs, we were running a shooter auto, and that was pretty cool to see. And then it just a more reliable, faster climb, and same old good old gears. Nice.
All right, so coming up this week, we've got 2 of our check-in teams competing. It is 5803 again, going back to the regional district event. Good luck. Get some sleep if you can. And also, Team 3940 Cybertooth. They're competing at their 3rd district event in the Indiana district at Perry Meridian. So good luck to you guys. Also, while we're here, let's talk to Matt. Matt, your team also competed this past week at Finger Lakes. Is that correct?
That is correct. We were at FLR.
Very cool. And so I think you guys were quarterfinalists. You were the number 7 seed, if I remember correctly.
Yep, we were selected by the number 7 seed, and we lost in quarterfinals to the number 2 seed, which ended up taking the whole regional. We had an absolute blast. I am so proud of my drive team and the kids. They worked through and did an awesome job. That number 2 seed was rough. That was a fuel-centered autonomous robot, and our gear cycles couldn't counteract those points at the end. So we matched them. We were scoring in the low 300s. I think 305 we were in there, and they were somewhere in the 320s. So I mean, we performed very, very well. It's just that the competition we were up against was just a little bit better.
Yep.
And I have to give a quick shout out because on that number 2 alliance was my high school team, 191, who took away the gold. I'm real proud of them.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And so you guys are competing at Boilermaker in a week and 2 weeks. 2 weeks, 1 week. Soon.
We are competing at Buckeye in 2 weeks, so not this weekend, but the next one. Yeah, it's kind of close to Boilermaker.
Yeah. And so not to forget the last guy on the show, Sean. So you guys have been to China. You've been to 2 events in Australia, all of them within the next 10 days. And then next week, you guys are going to another event. Is that right?
So we are going in a couple of weeks, I believe, from now to the New York regional. I believe that's on early April.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So you have gone literally halfway around the world to compete at first.
I think someone added up the miles at some point, and it was ridiculous. But yes.
Very cool. Are you going to be attending that event, or how did your team manage that?
So the team has been sending a somewhat different group of people to each event. Just obviously a couple of overseas trips is not the easiest thing to manage. So I think we're sending another group over to New York with a couple of the drive team members from the regionals we've already done. I believe from Australia number 1. And then we'll bring a bunch more people over when we move over to championships a week after that.
Cool. All right. Well, that's basically the rundown for everybody's events and our check-in, check-up for today. So let's end the show with our shout-outs for the week. So first up in the shout-outs is our director, Stephanie, behind the scenes. She wants to shout out to Team 2990. They're Hotwire. They're from the Pacific Northwest. They're from Turner, Oregon. And they're going to be competing at the Clackamas?
Yeah.
Clackamas. All right, sweet. Some peculiar name that I haven't heard before. Just went this weekend. So good luck to you guys out there from Stephanie. I want to shout out to everybody at the Montreal Regional. I have spent a lot of time, probably over a month worth of days in the last 3 months in Montreal for work. And it was really cool to sort of learn more French, which helped me to get involved in the French-Canadian Facebook group and sort of follow what they're up to. They're a very passionate group of people. I know some folks and some friends of folks who are on teams up there. So good luck to everybody up there. And if you want to watch a cool-looking webcast, watch these guys because they always put on a real good show. So let's go to next up is Evan. Who are you shouting out this week?
I got 2 shout-outs. Shouting out to 199 Deep Blue. They're a new rookie team, split off from Team 100, the Wildhats. Used to be 2 high schools, Woodside and Carlmont. Now they each have their own team, and they're competing at their first event this weekend in Sacramento. And of course, 2056 OP Robotics going to their first ever district event at Waterloo. I can't believe you guys made us wait until week 4 to see your robot, but best of luck and always looking forward to see what they come out with.
Very cool. All right, Emerson, who are you shouting out this week?
So this is the first week without a Texas regional. And so my shout out is actually going to be to our Team Texas buddies, 2158 Austin Cans and 3005 who are competing at Colorado this weekend. So I hope that they do really well and bring some blue banners back to Texas.
Cool. All right. Mountain Man would be proud for your shout out. Next up, let's go with Matt. Matt, who are you going to shout out this week?
Well, you may have heard that last week we got some snow in the Northeast. So I'm giving my shout out to all the volunteers that worked the 3 different events that we had in the Northeast. We had Pittsburgh, we had FLR, and we had Tech Valley. All 3 events were just 2 days after all that crazy snow. And for the most part, they all ran pretty smooth. There were hiccups and delays and field issues and all the normal stuff, but there were no major event delays or anything like that. And it was neat to see all that stuff come together, and everybody was all in the same boat. We were all struggling on Thursday, but we all got through it. So thank you to all the volunteers at those 3 events.
Yeah, big ups to them, especially because I'm not sure if everybody knows this, but the folks who are setting up the FLR event, they had to start set up at midnight because the snow was so bad the truck was super delayed.
Yeah.
So good on everybody for doing a fantastic job as always. Last but not least, Sean, who do you want to shout out this week, all the way from down under?
So I'd like to mention 4253 Raid Zero from Taiwan. They were at both of the Australia regionals, and they made the rather bold decision in the second regional to remove their shooter and some other then unnecessary weight to add a couple of motors to their drivetrain to just become a really strong gearbot, and they ended up getting 4 rotors once or twice because of it. And so I'll be interested to see when they go to Hawaii what their approach is, because they've proven that they're willing to completely change their robot and strategy if necessary.
All right, cool. Well, that'll do it for the show this week. Again, we're going to do a quick Q&A segment after the show because it is getting kind of late, despite we started late. We're going to do a quick Q&A segment after the show. So if you've got questions for anybody, send it to us in the Twitch chat with !Q, followed by your question. Our chat bot will grab it, and if we like it, we'll answer it on air. But before we take our quick break, and be right back in just a couple of minutes, I want to give a big thank you to Sean. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. Even with the technical issues, I just want to thank you so much for being here with us. And just so everybody else knows, Sean won the Dean's List Award this past week at his latest regional. So congratulations to you, Sean, for that.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's been a blast. Also, just so everybody knows, Sean is the first non-mentor we've had on the show. Sean is the first high school student we've ever had on GameSense in the last 4 years. And Sean, you did a great job. So we can't wait to have a Q&A with you in just a couple of minutes. So with that, like I said, we're going to be back really quickly. So for now, I'll say bye-bye and see you in just a second. All right, and we're back, everybody. That was a very short break. So, again, we're taking questions from people in the chat. So if you're watching live on Twitch, type your question in with !Q, followed by your question, and our chat bot will grab it. And if we like it, we'll answer it on air. So let's get to our first question here. This question comes in from question asker. We're putting it up on the screen. Oh, good old Azatoth here. Thank you once again for asking a question. So, do you think the overflow chutes will ever become a factor? Sean, why don't you start us off with this? What are your thoughts on the overflow chutes and how they're going to work?
I think it's going to depend a little bit on whether the opposition is able to pick up off the ground or not. So, when we were shooting a whole bunch of balls into the top of the boiler, we did end up having a few buckets overflow, and then the opposition, if they were to load the balls back onto the field for us, we can pick them straight up again. But depending on how good a robot's ball intake is, it's not necessarily going to be such a bad thing to just dump them back on the field. Shoots, though, no, I think they'll just keep clearing the balls away.
I think you're actually going to get into an interesting situation where there will be, and I don't think it'll happen very frequently, but I think there will be a handful of alliances that are really gunning for 4 rotors and would actually rather you be able to put those balls back out the overflow chute than clutter up their own loading lane with fuel when they're trying to do gears. It's an interesting balance, right? Because you're clearly dealing with an alliance that can shoot very, very well if they're reaching the overflow bins. But I think we'll see it a few times where a well thought out alliance is going to realize that It's more important for them to keep it as clear as possible and get the 4 rotors as cleanly as possible, and that's going to trump anything that the opposing alliance can do with fuel, whether or not they have easy access or not. Most robots can't shoot that fast.
Yeah, go ahead, Emerson.
I saw, and I didn't see every match this weekend, but the one team I did see use the overflow balls from the middle chute there was 125, and it was really cool when they did it because they were able to get this like super quick cycle in. And I was like, oh man, like that is the first time I've seen that this season. I've always known that it's been there, but and it was just, it made their cycle really quick. It was almost like that was those balls they probably wouldn't have gotten if they hadn't have been right there at that time. And so I think that going forward, as we start to see more shooters, I think that it will start to become a factor when you think about how quick you may be able to get some extra cycles in.
Well, yeah, especially because even though those chutes are kind of primarily designed for overflow, each alliance does start with 20 balls, right? So they do get just some balls that they can just dump from the get-go right down that chute. So
not out that chute. It's on the other side of the field.
Oh, you're right. Go
Yep.
backwards. Okay, never mind. All right. That's what you get for not having, like, I've only seen matches through cameras this year. Even when I've been to 2 events, Week 0 and WPI, and both the times I was staring at a screen the whole time. So that's my.
The last thing I have to say on this, I'm really waiting for like championships or something when some unsuspecting alliance isn't going to realize that they really have to dump those balls out, and a 125 or 987 or 971 is just going to park there and start an infinite cycle, and they're not going to realize that their opponents are literally just taking all the balls they scored and putting them right back into the robot.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I did remember seeing a little bit of video of 254 doing that, picking up balls that they had already scored and dumping them in through that chute, the overflow chute. Mm-hmm. So I think I'll actually be really interested to see when we get to the high level play if teams know how to handle it, right? Because this is a skill that nobody's practicing. Nobody's used to it because nobody's shooting that much. But when we get to the championship or district championships or Einstein, and it actually happens, are human players going to know enough to have enough wherewithal to actually do it? So we will see. All right, let's get our next question up here. Second question comes in from Luck of 13. He asks, how important is being able to pick up gears from the floor? How important is it? I think
very.
Very?
I would say for an alliance, having at least one member that can do it, I see it as being important. That brings out an interesting strategy that I started to see this weekend, where I watched the number 1 alliance from FLR. One robot went down to the retrieval station, got a gear, and brought it most of the way, and then another robot picked it up and scored it. It reminded me of some past games of some robots that would do similar tasks like that, and I could see it as being important because it'll make your cycle time much quicker if you're able to pick up gears that somebody else dropped or something like that. So maybe not every robot needs it, but having one that's able to kind of pick up what's left type thing is a good thing.
Yeah, there's a couple of really big advantages you get from it. Gear shuttling is one of them, especially if you're trying to go for a high rotor count or quick rotors. Being able to utilize all 3 members of your alliance for gears is really difficult if you're all having to go over to the loading station, because you have to coordinate it just right to make sure you're not all clogging up that loading lane. There are only 2 gear chutes after all. And so you start to throw some defense in there, and they can just really mess up the rhythm that the alliance has going. So if you can hold one robot back to just score the gears and have 2 of them shuttling, it really makes that a lot more viable. But it also lets you fully utilize the starting gears that your alliance has access to. So I would say it is important. However, it is not as important as having the blanket capability to score and pick up gears when there is fuel in the way. Most active gear pickup mechanisms can do that. Some of them struggle with it. There's a large number of passive gear mechanisms which really struggle when fuel is in the way, and I think that's a bigger issue than whether or not they can pick up off the ground.
So just to add to ground pickup's importance, at our first 2 regionals, we actually did a kind of ground pickup deprivation strategy when we did alliance selection. So we took 1884 in Shenzhen and then 1772 at Southern Cross, which were the 2 other ground gear intake robots at the event. And it meant that just whenever the opposition dropped a gear, we were the only ones on the field who were able to pick it up. So I feel like that's kind of a rather... I'm not going to say that it's going to be useful as more robots are able to pick it up off the ground, but while there are a limited number of robots that can do picking up off the ground, it's certainly very important.
Yeah, I think it's pretty important. And at the beginning of the season, I was like, oh, take it or leave it. It kind of depends on your strategy. But the more I see the game play out, I think the more important I think it's become. The robots that just have the mail slot, I think that it's, I just watch them take a long time to line up. They may miss a gear. Then all of a sudden, if you miss a gear, that gear's in your way to get the next one. Plus, there's balls in the way. And I think just as the weeks have gone on, I've just seen, a lot of different problems coming up for robots that don't have a ground intake. But I think that Matt said it really well too. When I think it's important for an alliance to have that capability. Maybe not every single robot on that alliance, but at least, one, probably more like 2. But, I just think the more I've seen, the more important I think it's become. So,
yeah,
it's definitely strategically advantageous. And so that lends itself to importance. I don't think it's critical, right? We saw Roboteer's alliance at Central Illinois. Didn't have floor gear pickup. It was just 2 really fast, well-driven passive gear. I believe they had the ability to drop off, but not pick up off the floor. But the ability to pick up off the floor, if you do it well, is a huge advantage.
Yeah, and I think before we go to the next question, you bring up a good point, both of you guys, that being able to pick up off the floor is an advantage. But I think that from the ground floor, not to actually say the floor too many times, but from the ground floor, you have to be able to put the gear on the peg and walk away, right? That's like a huge thing. So having a mail slot sort of design is even less advantageous than a robot that can at least put the gear on the peg and then walk away. Now, whether it's just so that you can have the pilots do multiple things or what have you, or even if it's just that that the gear is on the peg, you don't have to try to do the old make sure up down be good now. But and actually sort of just to talk about that, I thought it was really cool what 488 did, put their gear kind of like above the robot, which is it moderately worked for them, but I think it's a really cool idea that you sort of put the gear in a position where the driver can see it better. You're not having to look through your whole robot to deliver it down. But anyway.
I hate it.
You hate it?
I love 488, but 971 did kind of the same thing. They hold their gear up and up high, and if you watch their human player trying to get the peg to exactly the right height to get the gear out, it takes them 3 or 4 tries, right? And so it's like, yeah, I get that your pilot that your driver can see it better, but if the pilot has to do that much work to precisely line up both height and you've got 2 independent humans that are trying to line up height and side to side right at the same time, it's just a lot of coordination, and it definitely slows things down. Well, now for 488 in their case, right, it was just for their starting gear, right? They weren't trying to cycle with it. It was just to be able to start with the gear, get it on the peg, and go. I think I personally think there's a serious disadvantage for teams that have to lift the peg up in order to get the gear on it.
That's true.
Rant over.
Let's go into our last question of the night here before we end it for the evening. So this is from M Sellers 4613. Sean, do you know M Sellers, or they just happen to be a funny coincidence?
Sounds very much like our programming mentor.
Ah, there we go. Excellent. Well, thank you for watching. So he asks, how well are bots handling game piece obstructions at the peg and the loading stations? So I will say, I think that it depends on what robot you're asking about. Some of them are doing it really well, and some of them are absolutely basically burning to the ground when it happens.
It really comes down to whether or not you've designed for it.
Right. What were you saying, Matt?
I saw in a finals match too where it was a game piece at FLR that made the difference of being able to continue gear cycles or getting stuck, and I was hurting for the team, and and sometimes even if you plan for it, we had the issue too where we did all sorts of testing, driving frames around with bumpers on them and seeing what a good height was, and no matter how much you plan for it, we still drove over a gear and got a penalty almost called on us. So it's one of those, like, you plan for it, but it still happens anyway.
Yep. Yeah, I got to say that I think it's one of those things that people who've done first for a while immediately recognize that if you have a lot of game pieces, there's going to be pieces in the way. It's why we saw a lot of people have, like, side intakes, because they figured balls would be, like last year, balls would end up on the sides of the field, and getting that single ball was really important. And it still amazes me how many teams don't quite get to that level. But it's kind of understandable, I suppose. If you're just more focused on the task and not how the task is applied, it's easy to see that a problem. But I was happy that, so my robot obviously only has a passive gear mechanism. So I was happy to see that the prudence we'd taken with our ability to pick up a gear gave us the flexibility to pick it up, even if there was a gear in front of us or balls in front of us by the end of our first event. But it did take a little bit of finagling to figure out exactly what that was. So, Sean, what are your thoughts on this? Did he ask this question because of anything in particular, or just in general? Is there like an inside joke of a team that you guys played with or against that maybe had specific problems with this, or?
No, nothing I can think of in particular, although there were a number of robots at the Australia regionals, certainly, that had passive gear mechanisms, and so you'd see a lot of gears falling, which in the end would half the time be taken by either ourselves or 1772 with their ground pickup.
Yep.
Just with, once one gear's in the way, another two gears end up in the way because they can't align their passive intake. So
yeah, you're absolutely right. That actually kind of has this awkward building problem where it gets worse and worse and worse. So it's actually something I totally forgot about. So, all right. Anybody else have any last thoughts about this question before we end it for the evening? Nope. All right, cool. Well, before we end it, I want to give another big shout out to Sean. Sean, thank you once again for you and the Barker Redbacks for joining us tonight. It was a lot of fun having you on, and even though we didn't get to see your real life face on here, we did see you at a pretty happy moment in your life. And congratulations once again, by the way.
thank you very much.
Cool. All right. Well, everybody, that's going to do it for this week. Don't forget to join us every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, or if Skype updates at 8, maybe 9:15, at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, where we're going to have GameSense every week. So if you want to watch this show recorded, it's live. It's on YouTube right now as the broadcast ends. Go to youtube.com/FRCGameSense. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. All right. Well, that'll do it for the night. Good luck to all the teams competing, and have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye now.